G'day team, Jesse here again from JP Tuning. Today we're going to go over setting up the air pressure in a DVO Topaz 2. In the last video we went through and serviced this guy, gave it a quick air can service, and a couple of you have asked how or what process that we use in order to get these things set up well and get air pressure set up, get the band set up in the right chambers and get the rebound set up correctly. So today we are going to go over those. So the first thing that I do when fitting a Topaz 2 to any new bike or any customer's bike, or setting it up with a customer, a new racer or any rider, is we'll go through and grab the rebound knob and make sure it is wide open. The reason we do that is because we don't want the rebound damping to interfere with what the shock is feeling like when we're first setting it up. So if you're running rebound too slow and the shock is packing, it can register as not enough support or harshness, or the bike getting bogged down in its travel. So we need to ensure that that rebound is plenty fast enough to start off with. That is not the setting that you have to end up running, but it is a really good way to start getting a setup that means that you're only focusing on air pressure support, progression, negative chamber volume, and all those happy buzzwords. So yeah, a pro tip from me is always ensure that your rebound is as fast as you can possibly ride it to ensure that you're getting the most out of air pressure alone. So next step, before setting sag or anything along those lines, we need to check how many bands are in both the positive and negative chamber on these. The bands have a very big effect on the amount of force and the way it is distributed at certain parts of the travel. So if you have a lot of bands in the positive chamber, it obviously builds a lot of progression, a lot of support deeper into the bike's travel. And vice versa, when you put a lot of bands into the negative chamber of one of these shocks, you tend to find that it gives a lot of support early in the travel. This can also affect the sag number that you end up running. Obviously, if you run a greater sag number, because that's the way you like your bike to feel, you'll probably tend to run more progression or more bands in the positive chamber. If you like to run a lot less sag, we tend to find people will run less bands in the negative chamber in order to keep the sensitivity. But the cool thing with the shock is you have options of doing both of those. So all those three things, both positive, negative, and your sag number, all have an effect on the way the bike rides and the way it tracks in certain situations. And understanding those three really does have quite a big effect on how you get this thing set up properly. The other big factor that we have to deal with is the bike's kinematics itself. And that's why we like to start any of these setups by completely gutting the air shock of any bands to ensure that we're getting a really good idea and a really good reflection of, okay, what is the leverage ratio like at the beginning? Is it an insanely sensitive bike off the top anyway? So do we need to look at negative band support? And is the frame mechanically very progressive? So do we need to add bands for the positive chamber support at the end of the stroke? Without knowing these things, you're kind of just chasing your tail around. So step one, let's get all of these bands out of this thing. So take your air cap off. It's a really simple thing to do. Again, if we went to take the secondary can off, I think it's got no air in it. If we went to take the secondary can off with a whole bunch of air, you'd end up with a small bomb on your hands. So this base seal at the bottom of the air can, we're basically just using our fingers, pinching it off like that. I don't know if you can see that. Basically slide that guy down. And then we're just sliding this top can off. And you can see here on my bike, I've got 4 bands in the positive chamber. So I've built a lot of progression into the shock. So we'll go ahead and get all these guys off. Just for the sake of the video, once I'm done filming, I'll go and put them all back in, because I've done testing with the data acquisition system and I know that is the way I like my bike set. Right, so once you've done that, again, there's these little rubber seals at each point that separates the positive negative chamber. When we're sliding this air can up, you have to be very careful to slide past the O-ring, not to pinch it. So again, don't force it, just a little wiggle, pop it into place, and then grab this base air can seal, slide it back in. Awesome. Bands removed. Right, from there we need to set a baseline sag number. The best way to check this is to go online, find your frame manufacturer's specs on what they suggest for a sag percentage. Sag is purely based on how much your body weight, with all your riding kit on and everything you normally ride, displaces the shock's air pressure. That's it. It does not reflect where you're going to end up. It's just a really good starting point. That sag point is generally spec'd on most frames or bikes by the manufacturer because they know the frame's kinematics. They know how the bike works mechanically, whether it is a progressive design or a linear design, or heaven forbid one of the incredibly stupid falling rate designs. They understand how that works, so they've tested every body weight and they know the sag number that kind of roughly puts you in the ballpark. And as I said, that is a ballpark. So get out there, ride it with that sag number, with the positive negative chambers completely gutted, and see what you think. Have a bit of a play around with it, and start kind of getting a bit of riding in on trails that you know well, in conditions that you're comfortable with, at speeds that you normally do. So if you were to go out and ride it and notice that you were bottoming out on some big hard G outs, obviously that would mean that either the air pressure needed to come up or you needed to add bands into this top part here, which is the positive chamber. And then give that a go, try it, write down your air pressures that you use, write down the amount of bands you've put in, and feel it out. If from there you're finding that you're not using enough travel anymore and you still want to keep the same sag number, you can try things like bringing the air pressure down but reducing the negative chamber volume. What that does when you reduce the negative chamber volume is it stiffens up the early part of the travel, which can have a bit of an effect on your sag number. But the key is to understand the movements you're making and what effect they have on your bike in particular. And the best way to do that is spend a bit of time learning about this stuff, spend a bit of time understanding your bike's mechanical leverage and understanding what each change that you're doing is actually having on the bike. Alright, so we're going to go over this. This is a spare air can that I have. We're going to go over this again just to make sure it's very clear. Here is the positive chamber. So filling this side with bands is going to build progression into the air shock. It's going to become harder to bottom out, and that you'll find on bigger hits the bike will want to propel itself forward rather than sitting down into its travel. This is the negative volume chamber. So leaving this guy empty is going to have more sensitivity and allow that first part of the travel to be used more efficiently. Filling this guy up with bands is going to create a little bit more stiffness in that early part of the travel. It's also quite important to understand the balance between the positive and negative chamber. The amount of volume that you have here and the amount of volume that you have here has a really big effect on what the wheel rate, or what the rate that the wheel moves through its travel and how much force that involves has on the bike and on the shock. So it's really important that you understand that none of these changes are made in isolation. The most important thing is your air pressure. That is very, very important to set up correctly, and it's why that I always encourage riders to run no bands when they're initially setting up to get a feel for things. These bands are like icing on the cake, and just fine-tuning those little things out. Yeah, so when you're out on the trail and you're noticing things that aren't being dealt with by the air shock or the frame's kinematics, that's when you start looking at bands as a way to tune things in or out of the bike based on your preferences and how hard you're riding. So a lot of this stuff can be quite confusing because, as I said, you do have factors that are not made in isolation, adding air pressure, adding bands to different chambers, all has a knock-on effect throughout the shock. And if you're not fully confident as to what these changes are and what they might be, the best thing you can do is go into your local bike shop or any suspension tech that is fairly knowledgeable. We'll be able to talk you through this stuff. I'm always happy to field any questions, either on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. If people are having certain problems and they want to understand what these changes will do for them, their riding weight, their riding style, and most importantly their frame kinematics, I'm more than happy to take those questions and help you through it. But it is very important that if you are getting lost and things are getting confusing, that you approach someone who does it for a living. Most will be more than happy to help you out and to talk you through this stuff. And I hope little videos like this help take you through a couple of the steps and a couple of the ways that you can go about getting these things set up easily yourself. But if you do end up going down a bit of a rabbit hole, don't feel stupid about reaching out and asking these sorts of questions, because again, suspension techs and race techs and race mechanics do this for a living, so we're all here to help. Sweet. Alright guys, thanks for watching another one of these videos. Again, I appreciate all your feedback and comments on things you want to see, and any information that you're looking for, anything I can help clarify. I understand I'm not the best at explaining things half the time. It works well in my head, but sometimes the way I say it or the way I explain it doesn't make a lot of sense. So feel free to ask questions or ask to clarify points. The other big thing is the boys at DVO in California, they have the best customer service of anyone that I have ever come across. So if you're based in the States or even not, just flick them an email, flick them a message, and those guys are more than happy to, like myself, talk you through everything. Everything about your suspension, fork or shock, how to set it up, how to custom tune it, how to service it. It's a really, really important part of the DVO company, and it's a big part of why I consider them to be the best suspension company in the world to work with. They're just very transparent and very open-minded about all this stuff and making sure that their riders are happy and set properly. Alright guys, thank you very much, and chat soon.